January 2025 arrived with freezing winds and heavy snowfall in the Arctic region of Norway. The small, remote village of Longyearbyen in Svalbard remained covered in thick layers of ice and snow. This village, one of the northernmost settlements on Earth, was home to only a few hundred people, mostly researchers, fishermen, and police officers responsible for maintaining order in the harsh conditions. Among them was Henrik Dahl, a 39-year-old police officer dedicated to keeping the village safe. Henrik was well experienced in handling Arctic dangers. He had spent years working in extreme conditions, always prepared for unexpected threats. The region was known for its polar bears, which often wandered close to human settlements in search of food. Though these bears were protected by law, they posed a significant danger when they ventured too close. Henrik had dealt with several incidents involving these massive animals, always ensuring the safety of the villagers and the wildlife. On a particularly cold morning, Henrik set out on his routine patrol. He drove along the icy roads in his police vehicle, scanning the landscape for unusual activity. The sky was covered with thick clouds, and visibility was low due to the ongoing snowfall. His radio crackled with occasional reports from other officers, but everything seemed quiet. As he neared the village's waste disposal site, he noticed large tracks in the snow. He immediately recognized them as the footprints of a polar bear. Stepping out of his vehicle, Henrik followed the tracks cautiously. His breath formed small clouds in the freezing air as he moved forward, his boots crunching against the ice. Suddenly, he spotted a massive white figure near a pile of garbage. The bear, likely attracted by the scent of food, was rummaging through the waste. It was an enormous creature, its thick fur coated with snowflakes. Henrik knew he had to be careful. A startled bear could be unpredictable, and any sudden movement might provoke it. As he took another step forward, the bear suddenly turned and locked eyes with him. There was a brief moment of silence, and then, without warning, the bear charged. Henrik barely had time to react before the massive animal knocked him off his feet. The impact force sent him crashing onto the hard, icy ground, disorienting him. A sharp pain shot through his body as the bear's powerful claws grazed his arm, tearing through his thick winter jacket. He struggled to breathe, his mind racing as he tried to imagine an escape. Despite the intense pain, Henrik forced himself to move. Injured but still conscious, he began crawling toward his patrol car, his gloved hands slipping against the ice. He managed to reach his belt and unholstered his firearm. With great effort, he fired a warning shot into the air. The loud crack of the gun echoed through the frozen landscape, causing the bear to pause. Instead of continuing the attack, the animal backed away slowly, its black eyes still locked onto Henrik. Moments later, it turned and began moving toward a nearby cabin. Henrik remained on the frozen ground momentarily, trying to steady his breath. The pain in his arm grew stronger, but he knew he had to keep moving. He slowly pushed himself up, his legs unsteady from the shock. His eyes followed the polar bear as it moved toward the cabin. The animal's posture was tense, its large paws sinking into the thick snow with each step. Henrik realized that the bear was not leaving, but had found something else that had caught its attention. He took slow steps toward his vehicle, careful not to make sudden movements. His radio was still attached to his belt, and he pressed the button with stiff fingers. His voice was weak but firm as he reported the attack. The response came quickly, confirming that backup was on the way. The nearest station was miles away, but officers would reach him immediately. For now, he was alone. Henrik turned his focus back to the bear, digging into a pile of wooden crates near the cabin. The scent of fish filled the cold air. He remembered that researchers often stored supplies in that area, sometimes leaving food outside to study wildlife behavior. The bear must have mistaken the crates as a natural food source. It let out a deep growl as it used its claws to rip apart the wood, its strength easily breaking through the barriers. The situation was dangerous. If the bear found food near the village, it would return, increasing the risk for the people living there. Henrik needed to act before the animal became more aggressive. He raised his arm, wincing at the pain, and fired another warning shot into the sky. The sharp sound cut through the silence, and the bear flinched. It stepped back slightly but did not leave. Henrik kept his distance, his mind racing for a solution. He spotted an emergency flare inside his vehicle and quickly grabbed it. With one swift motion, he ignited it, causing a bright red light to glow against the white snow. The sudden brightness and the hissing sound startled the bear. It hesitated before turning away from the crates. Slowly, it backed away. Then, without warning, it bolted toward the open wilderness, disappearing into the trees. Relief washed over Henrik, but his body ached. His arm throbbed, and the icy air made the pain worse. He leaned against his vehicle, his breath shaky. Moments later, the sound of an approaching snowmobile reached his ears. The other officers had arrived. They rushed to his side, assessing his injuries. His arm was bleeding from the deep claw marks, and his jacket was torn, exposing his wounded skin. He was quickly taken to the nearest medical center, where his wounds were treated. Though the injuries were painful, they were not life-threatening, and he would recover after weeks of rest. Though shaken by the attack, the village was safe. The bear had left, but its presence served as a warning. Henrik knew these encounters would continue as long as humans and wildlife shared the same land. On August 18, 2021, the sun shone brightly over the Ural Mountains in Russia. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine trees filled the forest. A 68-year-old grandmother, Olga Ivanova, walked along a narrow dirt path with her 3 grandchildren. The children, aged 7 to 12, chatted excitedly as they searched for mushrooms among the fallen leaves. Olga had enjoyed this tradition for years, teaching them about nature and the beauty of the wild. Olga was a strong woman with a deep love for the outdoors. She had grown up in a small village near the mountains and knew the forest well. She had always warned her grandchildren about the dangers of wandering too far. The woods were home to many wild animals, and one had to be careful. Still, the peaceful surroundings gave her a sense of safety. The children trusted her completely, knowing she would always protect them. The group moved deeper into the forest, picking mushrooms and placing them in a woven basket. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was a perfect day. As they walked, Olga noticed fresh animal tracks on the soft ground. She paused, studying them closely. The footprints were large, too large to belong to any small animal. A sense of unease crept over her, but she remained calm. She decided they had gathered enough and turned to lead the children back toward the trail. Just as they were about to leave, a rustling sound came from nearby bushes. The children froze, their eyes wide with curiosity. A moment later, a large Russian grizzly bear emerged from the trees. It was not alone. 2 small cubs followed closely behind. Olga's heart pounded. She knew that a mother bear with cubs was one of the most dangerous encounters in the wild. If the bear felt threatened, it would attack. The bear locked eyes with Olga. It sniffed the air, sensing the presence of humans. Olga knew she had to act fast. Moving slowly, she reached for the children's hands, signaling them to back away. The bear let out a deep growl, standing on its hind legs. The children clung to Olga, fear taking over. Then, in an instant, the bear charged. It moved with incredible speed, closing the distance between them. Olga stepped before her grandchildren, spreading her arms wide to shield them. The bear swiped its massive paw, knocking Olga to the ground. The impact sent her rolling into the dirt as pain shot through her body. The children screamed as the bear turned its attention to them. The grizzly lunged at the children, knocking them down. 2 of them suffered deep wounds as the bear's claws tore through their skin. The youngest, Dmitri, was unable to escape. Olga, despite her pain, cried out desperately. Her voice echoed through the trees, startling the bear. After a few moments, the animal hesitated, then turned and fled back into the forest. The attack was over, but the damage had been done. The forest was silent after the attack. The leaves on the ground were disturbed, and the scent of blood lingered in the air. Olga Ivanova struggled to sit up, her body aching from the bear's powerful blow. She turned toward her grandchildren, fear gripping her heart. The two older children lay on the ground, their clothes torn and their bodies covered in deep wounds. Their faces were pale, and their small hands trembled as they whimpered in pain. Olga's eyes moved to the youngest child, Dmitri. He was motionless, his body still. His small frame had taken the worst of the attack, and he had not survived. A sharp pain filled Olga's chest as she realized what had happened. The weight of the moment was too much to bear. She reached out with shaky hands, tears streaming down her face. The forest, once peaceful, had turned into a place of sorrow. Summoning every ounce of strength, Olga forced herself to act. The two injured children needed help. She tore a piece of fabric from her sleeve and pressed it against the wounds of the older boy, trying to stop the bleeding. The other child cried softly, holding onto her arm. The pain was unbearable, but they needed to move. Olga knew they could not stay there any longer. She lifted one child onto her back and held the other close. Every step was difficult, but she pushed forward. The forest path seemed longer than before, and the trees seemed to be closing around her. She whispered words of comfort as she walked, hoping to keep the children awake. After what felt like an eternity, the trees opened up, revealing a small dirt road. A group of hikers appeared in the distance. Their eyes widened in shock as they saw Olga and the injured children. They rushed forward, helping her lower the children onto the ground. One of them pulled out a phone, quickly calling for help. The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency workers arrived. The children were lifted onto stretchers and rushed to the nearest hospital. Olga, exhausted and weak, collapsed to her knees. The weight of the day had finally caught up with her. News of the attack spread quickly. The tragedy shook the small village where Olga lived. People gathered in mourning, grieving for the young boy who had lost his life. Dmitri's funeral was held a few days later, and the entire community came together to honor him. The injured children remained in the hospital for weeks, recovering from their wounds. Doctors worked tirelessly to ensure they would heal. Olga visited them daily, her heart heavy, but grateful they had survived. The bear that attacked was never found. Wildlife experts believed it had acted out of fear, trying to protect its young. Signs were placed around the forest, warning visitors to be cautious. The attack served as a painful reminder of how unpredictable nature could be. In January 2025, the snow-covered Bitterroot Mountains in Montana stretched endlessly beneath a clear, starry sky. 5 hunters, Jake, Adam, Ethan, Chris, and Ryan, had been tracking elk through the thick forest for hours. They were experienced outdoors people, familiar with the challenges of winter hunting. After a long and exhausting day, they found a quiet spot to camp near a frozen stream. The cold air was sharp, and their breath formed misty clouds as they spoke about the day's search. As night settled, they built a fire and prepared their meal. Their cooler, packed with meat and snacks, was outside the tents. They knew food could attract animals, but exhaustion made them careless. The fire crackled, casting shadows across the snow, and the hunters retreated into their tents, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. In the darkness, a black bear moved silently through the trees. The unusually mild winter had left the bear restless and hungry. Drawn by the scent of food, it approached the camp, its powerful claws tearing into the cooler. The sudden noise broke the silence, stirring the hunters from their sleep. Jake was the first to sit up, listening carefully. Then, one by one, they heard the sounds. Ripping, heavy breathing, and low growls. Alarmed, they grabbed their flashlights and rifles and stepped outside. The freezing wind bit at their skin as their beams of light landed on the bear, its head buried deep in their supplies. Without warning, the animal lifted its head, its eyes glowing in the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, with a deep growl, the bear charged. Adam, standing closest, had no time to react. The bear slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its sharp claws tore through his jacket, leaving deep wounds across his chest and arms. He struggled, but the force of the attack was too strong. Chris and Jake rushed forward, shouting and waving their arms, but the bear turned its fury on them next. Jake was struck across the side, and the impact sent him crashing into the snow. Claws raked across his leg, leaving him in agony. Chris tried to pull him away, but the bear lunged, biting into his arm and dragging him backward. Ethan and Ryan, still near the tents, raised their rifles. The echo of gunshots shattered the night. The first shot missed, but the second whizzed past the bear's head, startling it. The animal hesitated, then released Chris and turned toward the forest. With another shot fired into the air, the bear finally retreated, vanishing into the shadows. As the hunters gasped for breath, the silence returned. But the damage had already been done. Adam lay motionless, his injuries too severe. He had not survived. Jake and Chris remained on the ground, their wounds bleeding into the snow. Ethan rushed to the emergency radio, knowing they had to get help before it was too late. The cold night air remained still as the remaining hunters gathered around their injured friends. Their breaths came out in short, panicked bursts as they assessed the situation. The snow around them had turned dark, a silent reminder of the attack that had just taken place. The bear was gone, but the damage had already been done. Ethan pressed his hands against Jake's wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. Chris lay nearby, his arm torn and useless. Adam was unresponsive, his body still and motionless in the snow. Ryan gripped the emergency radio, his fingers trembling as he called for help. The signal was weak in the mountains, but a response crackled through after several attempts. A rescue team was coming, but the wait would be long. Minutes stretched into hours as they tried to keep warm. The fire had gone out during the attack, and none had the strength to rebuild it. Jake groaned in pain, his leg burning from the deep wounds. Chris clenched his teeth, his injured arm cradled against his chest. The reality of what had happened settled over them like a heavy weight. When the first signs of the morning appeared, the sound of approaching rescue helicopters broke the silence. Medics and rangers arrived, moving quickly to assess the injuries. Jake and Chris were lifted onto stretchers, their wounds severe but treatable. Adam, however, was covered with a blanket, his life lost to the attack. The others watched in silence, exhaustion and grief washing over them. The journey to the nearest hospital was slow and rough. The helicopters flew over the snow-covered mountains, carrying the survivors away from the nightmare they had endured. In the medical facility, doctors worked to clean and stitch the deep wounds. Jake underwent surgery for his leg injuries, while Chris was treated for the damage to his arm. Both were expected to recover, but would carry the scars for the rest of their lives. Ethan and Ryan, though uninjured, remained by their sides, the weight of what had happened still heavy in their minds. News of the attack spread quickly. Local authorities began investigating, tracking the bear's movements through the area. Wildlife experts warned hunters and campers to take extra precautions, as food left outside often attracted hungry animals. The attack served as a reminder of the dangers in the wild. The families of the hunters arrived at the hospital, their faces filled with relief and sorrow. Adam's loss was felt deeply, leaving a hole in the group. A memorial was planned in his honor, a tribute to the friend they had lost. Days later, Jake and Chris were released from the hospital, their bodies healing, but their minds still carrying the memory of that night. The mountains, once a place of adventure, now held a different meaning for them. Though they had survived, the events of that winter night would never be forgotten. 76-year-old Margaret Dawson had spent the last 20 years in the same small wooden cabin tucked deep into the woods near a provincial park between Georgian Bay and the Ottawa River, Ontario, Canada, where she had built a quiet life after the death of her husband. She had always been independent, unwilling to trade the solitude of the wilderness for the comforts of city living, and even in her old age, she managed well enough on her own. Her days were simple. She tended to her small vegetable garden, collected firewood, and read by the window as the sun dipped below the trees. Black bears were familiar in the area. They often visited her property, sniffing around her compost pile or rummaging through the undergrowth. However, they had never given her reason to fear them. She had always believed that if left alone, they would do the same in return. But she was wrong. That evening, the air was thick with the lingering scent of the stew she had cooked for dinner, the rich aroma drifting through the open doorway. Margaret had left the door ajar, as she often did, enjoying the fresh breeze that carried the sounds of rustling leaves and distant owls into her home. She had never worried about wild animals venturing too close. After all, she had spent decades living alongside them without incident. She cleared her plate, rinsed her hands in the sink, and moved toward the living room, unaware that something hungry was moving through the trees just beyond the reach of the porch light, drawn by the scent of food. By the time she noticed the animal, it was already inside. The black bear stood just a few feet away, its dark fur blending into the shadows. It sniffed the air, its nose twitching as it searched for the source of the scent that had lured it in. For a moment, Margaret froze, her mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. She had never imagined a bear would enter her home. Her first instinct was to make herself big, wave her arms, shout, or do anything to startle it into retreating. But as she moved, the bear did not hesitate. The animal lunged forward, its weight knocking her off balance and sending her crashing to the wooden floor. It was on her before Margaret could scramble away, its massive paw slamming down against her shoulder, pinning her in place. Terrifying claws raked across her skin, tearing through the thin fabric of her sweater, the heat of her blood spreading beneath her. She struggled, kicking against the floor, trying to free herself, but she was a frail old woman, and the bear was young and hungry. The sound of her heartbeat roared in her ears as the bear lowered its head, its jaws clamping down onto her arm with a terrible force. She heard the bone snap a second before she felt the pain. It began to drag her, its powerful muscles pulling her toward the open doorway. The rough wooden floor scraped against her back as she fought against the inevitable, her free hand clawing at anything she could grasp, chair legs, the edge of a rug, the door frame. But nothing stopped her from being pulled outside. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the bear yanked her down the porch steps. Her body thudded against the ground. She could feel gravel digging into her skin as she was dragged across the yard. The night air was cold against her bloodied skin, but the pain drowned out everything else. The weight of the animal crushed her, its heavy body pressing down against her chest as it tore into her flesh, its claws slicing deep, its teeth snapping bones as if they were nothing. Her screams echoed through the trees, but no one was nearby. The bear would not leave until it had taken what it needed, and it needed to feed. Margaret's struggles weakened, her body trembling from shock, her strength fading as her blood seeped into the dirt. Somewhere in the darkness, the sounds of the forest continued as they always had. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of wind through the trees, the chirp of insects oblivious to the violence unfolding beneath them. The world did not stop for her suffering, and no one came to rescue her. By the time the sun rose, casting golden light through the trees, the yard was silent. The only signs of the night's horror left in the blood-stained ground and the torn remains of Margaret Dawson's clothing. Her body lay twisted among the fallen leaves, almost unrecognizable. The early morning air still carried the faint metallic scent of death. It was not until mid-morning that someone found her. Her nearest neighbor, a man who lived nearly half a mile away, had stopped by to check on her after noticing the back door swinging open, an unusual sight. As he stepped onto the property, the silence felt wrong, heavy, as if the air carried the weight of something terrible. His eyes scanned the yard, searching for movement, for any sign of Margaret, but his breath caught in his throat when he finally saw her. The sight of her battered, lifeless body sent a cold dread through him, his stomach twisting as he took an unsteady step back. The deep gashes that marred her flesh, the unmistakable bite marks, the blood-soaked ground, all of it told the story before he even had time to process it fully. The attack shocked the small community. Black bears had always been a part of life in these woods, but fatal attacks were rare, especially deep in human territory. Officials arrived to investigate, and their warnings about securing homes and keeping food properly stored felt hollow after what had happened. Some argued that the bears were not to blame, that their numbers had grown too large while their habitats had shrunk, forcing them closer to human settlements in search of food. They believed more encounters like this one were becoming inevitable. Others whispered that Margaret had been too trusting and had made a mistake in leaving her door open. Margaret's cabin stood empty, her back door locked, and her once warm home was now another reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. The logging camp sat deep in the dense forests of Kodiak Island, where towering trees stretched toward the sky, their thick trunks forming a wilderness wall. For weeks, the crew had been cutting their way through the land, felling trees, stripping branches, and stacking timber for transport. The air smelled of sawdust and gasoline, the constant whine of chainsaws and the heavy thuds of falling trees echoing through the valley. It was dangerous work, but for men like Logan Pierce, it was the only life they knew. Logan had spent decades in the logging industry at 51. His body hardened by years of physical labor, his instincts sharpened by long days in the wild. He was a man of experience, the kind others turned to when things went wrong. Logan never panicked, no matter the situation, but even he failed to see what lurked beyond the tree line that evening. Waiting, watching, its instincts stirred by the scent and sound of men encroaching on its domain. The sun hung low in the sky when the crew began packing up for the day, the golden light filtering through the trees as they shut down their equipment and loaded their gear into the trucks. The forest was quiet now, with only the birds' distant calls and the leaves rustling in the breeze breaking the stillness. Logan wiped the sweat from his brow, rolling his stiff shoulders as he turned toward camp, unaware that something was moving through the undergrowth, creeping closer with each passing second. Then the stillness shattered. A powerful sound ripped through the trees, sending a shockwave through the camp. The man froze in place. Then a colossal shape exploded from the brush, charging. It was an enormous Kodiak bear. Its frame dwarfed even the largest of the men, its thick claws curled, and its eyes locked onto the nearest target, Logan Pierce. Logan cursed as the bear knocked him off his feet. The air was crushed from his lungs, his ribs feeling like they had been snapped in half. The bear reared up, its massive form looming over him, its breath hot against his skin as it let out another deafening roar. Then came the claws. They tore into him with brutal precision, slicing his flesh and muscle like a blade through paper. The pain was overwhelming. Logan's body jerked as the bear's weight pressed down, crushing him beneath it. He tried to fight or at least move, but it was like being pinned beneath a mountain, his strength nothing compared to the raw, unrelenting power of the beast. The others snapped out of their shock, shouts filling the air as men scrambled for their weapons, rifles being wrenched from trucks, safety catches flicked off with frantic hands. A shot rang out, then another, the sharp cracks cutting through the chaos. But the bear didn't stop. Bloodied and frenzied, it lashed out again, its massive paw swiping at Logan's chest, sending another explosion of pain through his already mangled body. His vision blurred, darkness creeping at the edges, the world tilting in and out of focus. Another shot rang out, followed by another in rapid succession. The bear recoiled as a bullet tore into its side. It staggered, its muscles tensing. But instead of retreating, it turned, eyes flashing with primal rage as it lunged at the nearest man. The beast slammed into Rick Carter, a younger logger. The bear's jaws snapped. Rick screamed, writhing beneath the sheer force of the attack, his hands scrambling for anything to shield himself. Owen Armstrong tried to help Rick but was also knocked off his feet. Owen's head hit the ground with a sickening thud, and the man lost consciousness. Another gunshot cracked through the trees, and this time the bullet struck true, hitting the bear in the shoulder. A deep bellow of pain erupted from the animal's throat. It stumbled, blood dripping from its wounds, but its rage wasn't spent. It turned again, eyes wild, nostrils flaring, its massive chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Another shot followed, then another, the bullets tearing into its thick hide, forcing it backward step by step. The men fired relentlessly, their shouts blending with the thunderous cracks of their rifles. The beast stood there for a moment, its massive body heaving, blood staining its golden-brown fur, its wounded shoulder trembling under its weight. It turned, muscles coiling as it pushed itself back into the forest, crashing through the undergrowth until the sound of its retreat faded into the distance. Silence settled over the camp, broken only by the ragged breathing of the surviving men. Logan lay motionless in the dirt, his body torn, his blood pooling beneath him, his breath shallow and uneven. His vision swam, the sounds around him dull and distant, his mind struggling to hold consciousness. Somewhere he could hear voices, could feel hands pressing against his wounds, but the pain was too much, the weight of his injuries dragging him under. And then, Logan was gone. Rick and Owen survived the attack, but their nightmares never left them. The attack shook the logging industry with headlines, calling it one of the deadliest bear encounters in recent history. Experts debated the reasons behind the attack: hunger, territorial aggression, or the increasing overlap between human activity and the bear's habitat. Regardless of the cause, the aftermath was undeniable. Within weeks, new policies were put in place. Armed patrols were stationed at remote logging sites, bear deterrents were installed, and emergency protocols were rewritten to ensure no crew was left unprotected. But for the men who had been there, for those who had fought to survive, no rule or precaution could erase the memory of that day. And nothing could bring Logan back. The search had stretched into its third day, and the dense backcountry of Montana showed no signs of giving up the missing hiker, a lone traveler who had failed to return from a planned 2-day trek. He had vanished without a trace, leaving only footprints deep into the rugged wilderness before fading into nothing. The search and rescue team, experienced in handling such operations, moved methodically through the thick forest, their radios crackling with updates as they spread out in a coordinated grid pattern. Each of them understood the dangers of the terrain, the hidden cliffs, the fast-moving creeks, the unpredictable shifts in weather, but none of them had expected the real threat that ultimately came for them. Steve Davis, a veteran officer with nearly 15 years of experience in wilderness rescues, led the team through a narrow valley thick with towering pines and dense underbrush. At 43, he was a seasoned professional, his instincts sharpened by years of working in some of the state's most remote areas. His focus was completely on the search. As he walked, his eyes scanned the ground for signs of the missing hiker, and his ears listened for any distant sound that might signal life. But the sound that reached his ears was something entirely different, a deep, rumbling huff, a warning that sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system before his brain could fully process it. Ahead, barely 20 yards away, the bush parted, and a grizzly bear stepped into view. It was a big creature with powerful muscles and dark, dangerous eyes that watched the group with an intensity that sent an unmistakable message. Just beyond it, partially obscured by the foliage, a small cub shifted in the undergrowth, the true reason behind the mother's sudden aggression. Steve knew instantly what they had stumbled into, and his stomach dropped as he made a discreet hand gesture, signaling the others to stop. The team slowed their movements, shifting into a controlled retreat to avoid further provoking the bear. They had been trained for this. They knew not to turn their backs, run, or make sudden gestures that could trigger an attack, but none of it mattered. The bear's instincts had already taken over. The massive creature closed in with a force that made the ground tremble beneath its weight. The bear barreled into Steve, sending him crashing onto the forest floor, with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. He struggled to roll away, to push himself up, but the bear was on him, its massive paw slamming down. Steve could feel its claws slicing across his back. His team moved in to help, their training battling against the sheer horror of what they were witnessing. One officer, Mark Talbot, lunged forward, shouting, waving his arms to draw the bear's attention away from Steve. The bear turned, swinging its massive head, its jaws snapping shut with a deep, bone-chilling growl, before launching itself at Mark, slamming him to the ground with a force that sent leaves and dirt flying into the air. Another rescuer, Aaron Price, barely had time to react before the bear turned again, its rage indiscriminate. She moved to reach for her bear spray, but the beast struck before she could free it from her harness. The animal's claws caught her across the thigh, ripping through her soft flesh, sending her sprawling onto the ground with a sharp cry of pain. Steve, barely clinging to consciousness, felt the bear's weight lift from his back as it turned its attention to the others. Blood ran hot down his skin, pooling beneath him as he struggled to move, to think, to do anything but drown in the pain that radiated through his body with every pulse of his heart. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard the desperate shuffle of boots, the snapping of twigs, and his teammates' short, frantic breaths as they fought against the crazed creature. Then, through the blur of pain and fear, a burst of mist filled the air. The sharp, acrid scent of bear spray cut through the chaos, its chemical sting filling the space between the team and the raging grizzly. The bear reared back, panicked and confused. It stumbled away, trying to escape the burning sensation in its eyes and nostrils. It pawed at its face, huffing and growling, backing away in jerky, uncertain movements before finally turning and crashing back into the undergrowth. The silence that followed was deafening. Steve forced himself to move, his limbs sluggish, his body screaming in protest as he lifted his head, blinking against the sweat and blood that blurred his vision. Mark lay sprawled a few feet away, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. his arm twisted unnaturally beneath him. Erin was slumped against a fallen log, her hands pressed against her bleeding leg, her face pale and strained. The rest of the team stood frozen, their bodies rigid with shock, their breaths ragged, their eyes wide with the realization that they had come within inches of death. They wasted no time. With the bear gone, the situation's urgency crashed over them in full force. Radios crackled to life, and voices sharpened with tension as they called for emergency extraction, relaying the severity of their injuries and the need for immediate medical attention. They secured the wounds and moved as quickly as possible through the trees, their minds focused on one thing: getting out alive. The team was barely holding together by the time the rescue helicopters arrived. The attack dominated the news in the following days, sparking debates on the increasing number of bear encounters in the backcountry, whether more precautions were needed, and how search and rescue teams could be better equipped to handle such unpredictable threats. Wildlife officials located the Grizzly and her cub days later, tranquilizing the mother and relocating both far from human trails in hopes of preventing another attack. However, Steve and his team had already suffered damage. They had survived, but survival came with a cost, one that would stay with them long after their wounds had healed. Lucas and Emily had been working together for over a year as U.S. Rangers, two of the most trusted officers assigned to Kodiak Island's wilderness. At 45 years old, Lucas was known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts. Emily, just a few years younger, had a relentless drive and a deep respect for the wilderness that made her a perfect partner. On May 8, 2000, they were on a routine expedition in a remote part of Kodiak, scouting the area for a new conservation project aimed at preserving the island's delicate ecosystem. The dense forest and towering peaks around them were breathtaking, but there was something in the air that day, something that made the hairs on the back of Lucas's neck stand on end. He had sensed it first, the sharp scent of something wild. Kodiak bears were not uncommon in these parts, but the size of the one they had spotted earlier on their way there had been alarming. They had taken every precaution, setting up their camp with care and keeping their distance from the bear's known territory. Still, nature had a way of surprising even the most experienced rangers. They had just finished securing their equipment near the edge of the forest, their camp nestled in a small clearing by a shallow stream. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves surrounded them, but everything felt too quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Lucas glanced at Emily, his instincts kicking in. She too was alert, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees. Neither of them had seen or heard anything unusual, but they both knew it was foolish to ignore the signs of danger that lurked just beyond the tree line. And then it came. At first, it was just a movement, too large, too heavy to be a deer. Then the unmistakable shape of a massive Kodiak bear emerged from the shadows, its dark, hulking body moving slowly but steadily toward their camp. Its fur was thick and matted, its muscles rippling beneath the pelt. The bear's eyes locked onto them, its nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of their food and equipment. It was huge, its size and presence almost overwhelming, like a living mountain moving through the brush. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to Emily, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. They knew how to handle encounters with bears, but seeing one this close, especially one this large, was entirely different. The bear was cautious at first, moving slowly, its eyes never leaving them as it approached the camp. It looked as if it were deciding whether they were worth the trouble. Lucas whispered, telling Emily to stay calm and that everything was going to be okay, though his own words did little to reassure him. He tightened his grip on his rifle and signaled to Emily to slowly back away. They had to retreat, slowly, cautiously, without provoking the bear. But as they began to move, the bear's pace quickened. Its eyes flared with sudden aggression, and in a heartbeat it lunged forward, the ground trembling beneath its massive weight. Lucas's heart slammed against his ribcage as he raised his rifle, aiming for the air. He pulled the trigger twice, the sharp crack of the warning shots echoing through the trees. But instead of retreating, the bear only became faster, its enormous paws slamming against the earth in a deadly rhythm. The rifle's mechanism jammed. Lucas's breath caught in his throat as he tried to clear the obstruction, but the bear was already upon him. It was as if time slowed, the world around him narrowing to the unstoppable force charging toward him. With a violent roar, the bear collided with him, slamming him to the ground with a force that rattled his skull. Pain exploded through Lucas's body as he felt the bear's claws rake across his chest. He tried to push the beast away, but his strength was no match for its sheer size. One powerful swipe from the bear's paw sent his head spinning, and the world around him darkened as unconsciousness began to take hold. Emily's heart raced as she watched the bear attack Lucas, her body frozen in shock. Everything felt surreal, as though things were happening in slow motion. She couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Her mind screamed for her to help, to do something, but all she could see was the savage power of the bear, its jaws snapping dangerously close to Lucas. Without thinking, Emily lunged forward, grabbing for a nearby flare gun. She fired into the air, the bright flash lighting up the forest. But the bear didn't seem to care. It was too focused on Lucas. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as she reached for her radio, desperate to call for help. But she only managed to get a word or two out before the bear turned, its massive head swinging toward her. The next thing she knew, the bear was on her, its claws sinking into her flesh. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. As the bear's weight pressed down on her, she tried to fight back, to push it off, but Emily feared it was over. The animal's teeth sank into her shoulder. She could feel the life draining from her body, but somehow her hand still gripped the radio. She managed to pull herself away just enough to activate the distress signal, sending a frantic call for help before her vision blurred and her body gave in to exhaustion and blood loss. She collapsed, her body crumpling to the ground as darkness claimed her. 30 minutes later, when the rescue team arrived, they found Emily barely alive and covered in blood, her pulse faint, but still present. Lucas, however, was beyond help. The bear had left nothing behind of him but a lifeless, mangled body. The attack shook the entire ranger community to its core. Lucas had been an experienced ranger, one of the best, and yet the unpredictability of nature had claimed his life. Emily survived, but the emotional and physical toll was immense. The tragic event led to immediate changes in the safety protocols for rangers working in bear territories. New guidelines were established, and specialized bear deterrents were put in place, ensuring that no ranger would face a similar fate. Emily would carry the memory of her fallen partner, Lucas, with her forever, determined to honor his sacrifice and continue the vital work they had started together. Kevin had always been the type of person who sought thrills, whether it was bungee jumping off cliffs or navigating the busy streets of foreign cities. Adventure ran in his veins. At 32 years old, he was confident in his ability to handle any situation, even if it meant pushing the boundaries of safety. So when he arrived in the wilderness of Montana during a solo trip across the U.S., the promise of untamed nature and the chance to see wildlife up close excited him. The day had started like any other in the park. Kevin had driven along the winding roads, stopping occasionally to take photos of the sweeping landscapes and the occasional animal sighting. But it wasn't until he reached a secluded spot that his adventure truly took a dangerous turn. He spotted the grizzly from a distance. It was moving slowly through the tall grass, its fur glistening in the afternoon sun. Kevin stopped his car, excitement coursing through him as he grabbed his phone and started live streaming. He had seen bears from afar before, but this was the kind of close encounter he had only dreamed about. The park had strict rules about keeping a safe distance from the animals, especially bears. The signs were clear, urging visitors to keep their distance. But the thrill of being so close to such an imposing creature clouded Kevin's judgment. He ignored the warnings, thinking that a few steps closer wouldn't hurt. After all, he had seen people on social media getting close to wildlife, capturing the perfect photo. Why couldn't he do the same? With his phone held up, Kevin moved toward the bear, narrating his excitement to the live audience. The distance between them quickly closed, and the bear seemed unaware of his presence, its focus on the grass in front of it. Kevin's heart raced as he crept closer, the grass crunching underfoot. A smile tugged at the corners of his lips. This was going to be the perfect shot, a selfie with the mighty grizzly in the background. He felt invincible, as if nothing could go wrong. But nature had other plans. The bear, with its keen sense of smell and heightened awareness, suddenly raised its head. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air. The shift in its posture was subtle at first, but Kevin noticed it immediately. The bear's ears flattened, and its dark eyes narrowed as it locked onto him. Panic gripped Kevin's chest. He froze, feeling his breath catch in his throat. The bear didn't look afraid, it looked angry. For a moment, the bear simply stared at him, its massive body still, its muscles tensing under its thick fur. Kevin's heart raced, and he realized too late that he had crossed a line. He was too close. The bear had every reason to feel threatened. Then, in the blink of an eye, the bear surged forward with terrifying speed. Kevin's body screamed at him to run, but his legs were paralyzed, locked in place by fear. He turned to flee, but the bear's powerful legs covered the ground between them in seconds. Before Kevin could even reach the safety of his car, the bear crashed into him. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. Kevin was knocked off his feet, his body slamming into the ground with bone-jarring force. His phone landed nearby, still recording. He gasped for air as the weight of the bear pressed down on him, its claws raking across his chest and arms. The pain was immediate, sharp, and unbearable. Its claws dug deeper into his flesh, tearing through his body, and his own screams echoed in the open space. As the bear mauled him, Kevin's mind flashed to the warnings he had ignored just moments before. He had been stupid, and now he was paying the price. Every movement felt like it was in slow motion, his arms flailing, trying to defend himself, but it was useless. The bear was relentless, its jaws snapping at his legs as it tore into his flesh. His body was covered in blood and his vision blurred from the pain. The sound of his screams carried through the open air, piercing the relative calmness of the park. His live stream continued, the horrifying attack unfolding in real time before horrified viewers. Messages flooded the chat, some begging him to run, others frantically typing for someone to call the authorities. But Kevin couldn't see the messages. He couldn't do anything. A group of tourists hiking on a nearby trail heard the commotion. They stopped dead in their tracks, recognizing the danger, but they were too far to intervene. They couldn't get to him in time. Panic rose in their chests as they fumbled for their phones, dialing emergency services as quickly as they could. But the bear continued its brutal assault, showing no sign of letting up. Kevin's body went limp as the bear's claws raked across his abdomen. His breath was ragged, each exhale a labored effort, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The bear finally backed off slightly, but it wasn't finished. Kevin tried to scramble away, but his limbs felt like lead. Blood pooled around him, and his vision faded further. His thoughts became fragmented. He couldn't move anymore. He couldn't even scream. Finally, the hikers, still too far away to help, managed to get through to the rangers. When emergency services arrived, the bear was gone, but so was Kevin. The live stream had ended. His torn body lay helpless on the ground. The footage of the attack spread rapidly, fueling widespread outrage and sadness. People mourned Kevin's tragic end, but there was also an undercurrent of anger. His reckless decision to get close to the bear had cost him his life, but it also served as a grim reminder of the dangers of ignoring safety regulations in places like this. For Kevin's family and friends, the pain of losing him would never fully go away. They mourned not just his death, but the tragic way in which it had happened. The sun was beginning to dip behind the Sierra foothills, casting a warm golden hue across the suburban neighborhood in California. Karen, in her mid-40s, was wrapping up her evening routine. The calm of the evening was comforting as she stepped out of the back door of her house to check on the trash bins by the porch. She was an active woman, well acquainted with the natural surroundings of her home, living just on the edge of a residential area where the wilderness crept close to civilization. Karen had spent years in the foothills, well aware of the occasional wildlife sightings, but she had always felt safe in her neighborhood, trusting the ways of suburban life to protect her. As she stepped onto the porch, the faint smell of something sweet and nauseating drifted through the air, catching her attention. The lids of the trash bins near the corner of her yard had been knocked off. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming the wind had done it. But as she walked closer, her eyes widened in disbelief. In the growing twilight, she saw a large black bear, its frame hunched over the spilled contents of the bins. The bear, attracted by the scent of leftover food, was rummaging through the trash, seemingly oblivious to Karen's approach. Frozen for a moment, Karen's heart raced. She knew bears sometimes came into the neighborhood, but seeing one so close to her own home left her feeling uneasy. Her instincts told her to retreat inside, but curiosity got the better of her. She took a cautious step back, hoping the bear would simply wander off. But the bear, startled by her movement, immediately lifted its head, its dark eyes locking with hers. In that instant, the air shifted from calm to tense. The bear took a deep, aggressive sniff, and then everything changed. Karen raised her arms to protect herself, but it was no use. Her head slammed into the concrete as she hit the ground hard, pain radiating through her skull. The bear didn't hesitate. It was on her instantly. Its claws raked across her abdomen, tearing through the soft skin. Karen screamed, the sound sharp and panicked, echoing into the evening air. The bear swiped at her chest with a ferocity she couldn't have imagined. The weight of the animal was overwhelming, and Karen struggled to shield herself with her arms, feeling the sharp claws tear into her limbs. Her heart pounded, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the bear continued to maul her. She could feel its hot breath on her skin as it pressed down on her chest. Karen was certain that she wouldn't survive this. Panic surged within her as she realized how vulnerable she was, so close to death. But through the haze of pain, she heard the distant sound of something. Voices, then footsteps. People. Her neighbors were coming to save her. Her screams had drawn attention. As the bear continued its attack, the sound of shouting and rushing footsteps grew louder. A few nearby neighbors, alerted by her cries, rushed to her aid. Their voices rang out in a mixture of shock and fear. One man, Greg, was at the front of the group. He grabbed a garden hose and aimed the stream of water at the bear, hoping to drive it away. The bear, startled and irritated, paused its assault long enough to look toward the group of people. The neighbors were yelling, clanging pots and anything else they could find to make noise, while Greg kept the pressure on the hose. Slowly, the bear began to retreat. It disappeared into the thicket, leaving the scene. Karen lay on the ground, gasping for breath, her body bloodied and bruised. Her neighbors hurried to her side, their faces pale with shock as they knelt beside her. One woman, Anne, was trying to stop the bleeding, using a towel to press against Karen's abdomen. Another woman, Marcy, was already on the phone with emergency services, her voice frantic as she relayed their location. Within minutes, the sound of sirens broke the night's tense silence, growing louder as paramedics arrived at the scene. They rushed to Karen, working quickly to assess her injuries. She had deep claw marks across her chest and arms, and the damage to her abdomen was significant. Her head throbbed from the blow it had taken against the concrete. She was conscious, but barely. The pain was overwhelming, and her body felt as if it were shutting down. The paramedics had to be careful. Too much movement could cause more internal damage. As the ambulance doors closed, Karen's mind began to slip in and out of consciousness, the trauma of the attack lingering like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Hours later, after being treated at the hospital for serious but non-fatal injuries, Karen woke up in a sterile room. She was surrounded by doctors, nurses, and her family, who had arrived after being contacted. The worst of the physical damage had been addressed, but the emotional toll of the attack was just beginning to set in. The bear, meanwhile, had not gone unnoticed. Wildlife officers quickly began their search, and by the following morning they had located the bear near the outskirts of the neighborhood. It was tranquilized and relocated to a safer, more remote area. Local officials praised the quick response of the wildlife team, but the attack had already sparked a wider conversation about urban wildlife safety. Karen's story became a cautionary tale, prompting local authorities to implement stronger measures to bear-proof trash bins in the area. New education campaigns were launched, warning residents about the dangers of attracting wildlife with easily accessible food sources. The city encouraged everyone, especially those living near bear habitats, to be more vigilant and respectful of the wildlife surrounding them. The attack left its mark on Karen and the neighborhood. For Karen, the road to recovery would be long, both physically and emotionally. But it also left behind a strong message about the importance of respecting nature, especially when living so close to it. In the dense, misty forests of British Columbia's Selkirk Mountains, an area known for its pristine wilderness and abundant wildlife, a hunting expedition turned tragic in October 2013. The remote region, characterized by thick underbrush, towering conifers, and rugged terrain, had long been favored by experienced hunters seeking elk and deer during the fall season. This area had also experienced increasing bear activity due to declining salmon runs in nearby rivers, forcing the predators to range farther for food before winter hibernation. Christopher "Chris" Blackwood, a 42-year-old veteran hunter with over 2 decades of wilderness experience, had ventured deep into this territory accompanied only by his 6-year-old German shepherd, Scout. Blackwood had raised Scout from a puppy, training him for hunting expeditions. The bond between them was exceptional, with Scout having saved Blackwood from potential danger on several previous occasions by alerting him to nearby predators. On that fateful morning, Blackwood and Scout had been tracking a small elk herd for approximately 3 hours, moving quietly through a particularly dense section of forest. The weather had turned unseasonably cold, with frost clinging to the underbrush and their breath forming clouds in the chilled air. According to Blackwood's later account, Scout had shown signs of unease for nearly 20 minutes before the incident, repeatedly stopping to sniff the air and whining softly. Blackwood admitted that he had dismissed these warnings, assuming Scout had detected the elk they were pursuing. This misinterpretation would prove catastrophic within moments. As they navigated around a large fallen cedar, a massive grizzly bear erupted from a dense thicket less than 15 yards away. The bear, later estimated to weigh nearly 700 pounds, had likely been feeding on a cached elk carcass hidden in the brush. The grizzly's initial focus fell immediately on Scout, perhaps perceiving the dog as a competing predator threatening its food cache. Before Blackwood could raise his rifle or issue a command, the bear lunged forward with surprising speed, covering the distance between them in seconds. Displaying the protective instinct he had been trained for, Scout moved to position himself between the bear and his master. The bear seized Scout in its massive jaws, clamping down on the dog's neck and shoulder. Scout's agonized yelp echoed through the forest as Blackwood screamed in horror, instinctively rushing forward to save his companion. Further enraged by Blackwood's approach, the bear dropped the severely injured dog and redirected its aggression toward the hunter. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the grizzly struck Blackwood across the chest and face, sending him crashing backward onto the forest floor. The bear's claws tore through his heavy hunting jacket and left deep lacerations across his torso. Blackwood later recalled experiencing a moment of absolute clarity despite the terror, knowing that his survival depended on immediate action. As the bear advanced toward him, Blackwood withdrew the hunting knife sheathed at his belt, a 7-inch fixed-blade gift from his father. When the grizzly loomed over him, its massive head blocking out the filtered sunlight from above, Blackwood thrust the knife upward with all his strength, striking at the bear's neck and chest. The ensuing struggle lasted less than a minute, but would forever be seared into Blackwood's memory. He described fighting with desperate intensity, slashing at the bear's face and forelimbs as its crushing weight pressed down upon him. The knife connected several times, causing the bear to rear back in pain and confusion. This momentary respite allowed Blackwood to roll sideways and scramble toward his fallen rifle. The bear, now bleeding from multiple wounds, seemed to reassess the situation. After a brief standoff, during which Blackwood managed to grip his weapon, but found himself unable to aim properly due to his injuries, the grizzly retreated into the underbrush, leaving an eerie silence in the forest clearing. Blackwood immediately turned his attention to Scout, but the loyal dog had already succumbed to his catastrophic injuries. The moment of recognition that his faithful companion of 6 years was gone would later be described by Blackwood as more painful than his physical wounds. Despite suffering from blood loss, shock, and 3 broken ribs, Blackwood managed to navigate back toward the logging road where he had parked his truck nearly 4 miles away. The journey took over 5 hours as he periodically lost consciousness. A pair of hikers eventually discovered him, and they helped transport him to the nearest medical facility. Following the incident, provincial wildlife authorities tracked and located the wounded bear, which was subsequently euthanized due to concerns it might become more aggressive toward humans after the encounter. Examination revealed that the bear was an older male suffering from dental abscesses, which likely contributed to its unusually aggressive behavior. For Blackwood, recovery was both physical and emotional. The attack left him with permanent scarring across his chest and face, but the loss of Scout affected him more profoundly. 6 months after the incident, Blackwood established the Scout Safety Initiative, an educational program designed to train hunters and outdoor enthusiasts about bear safety protocols. Through this program, Blackwood hoped to prevent similar tragedies while honoring the memory of the companion who had given his life to protect his master. On May 10, 2024, what started as an ordinary day for the U.S. Rangers in a national park on the Alaska Peninsula, across from Kodiak Island, would soon take a turn they never expected. Renowned for its untamed wilderness and thriving population of grizzly bears, the park was patrolled by some of the nation's most skilled rangers. Tasked with safeguarding visitors and the park's fragile ecosystem, the rangers embarked on their morning patrol, venturing along a trail deep into the forest's heart. The air was sharp and invigorating, the earthy scent of rain lingering on the damp ground beneath their boots. The rangers had been tracking wildlife activity in the area when they came across something unusual: enormous paw prints embedded in the mud. The prints were much larger than any they had seen before. Measuring nearly twice the size of a normal grizzly track, they knew they were following something massive. With years of experience in tracking, they estimated that the bear responsible for these prints was unlike any recorded before. Excitement filled the group as they continued forward, eager to document what could be a historic discovery. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the trees became thicker and visibility decreased. The forest felt different, quieter than usual. Even the sounds of birds and small animals had faded. The rangers exchanged glances, sensing they were nearing the creature's territory. They remained cautious, ensuring they did not disturb the natural environment. Their goal was simple: to observe from a distance and gather information. Then, they saw it. Standing in a clearing ahead was the largest grizzly bear they had ever encountered. The bear was an incredible sight at 12 feet tall and weighing over 1,500 pounds. Its thick, dark fur was covered in scars from battles fought over the years, making it look more like a prehistoric beast than a modern-day bear. The rangers froze, watching in awe. They knew they had to be careful. At first, the bear seemed unaware of their presence. It sniffed the air, its massive body moving slowly as it searched for food. The rangers stayed still, hoping to observe from a safe distance. But within seconds, everything changed. The bear suddenly turned its head, locking eyes with the rangers. A low growl rumbled through the trees, chilling down their spines. Its posture shifted from calm to tense, and its muscles tightened as it prepared to move. The rangers recognized the signs immediately. This was not a bear content with their presence. It felt threatened. Before they could react, the grizzly charged. The ground shook as it ran toward them, its massive paws kicking up dirt with each step. The rangers, experienced in dangerous encounters, wasted no time. They turned and ran, knowing that standing their ground was not an option. Their only chance was to retreat and hope the bear would stop chasing them. The chase was terrifying. The grizzly was fast, much faster than they had expected. As they ran through the forest, its heavy breaths and pounding footsteps grew louder. They needed to find an escape before it was too late. The rangers kept running through the dense forest, their hearts pounding as the massive grizzly followed closely behind. Every step they took felt heavier, and their bodies were pushed to the limit as they tried to escape. The ground was uneven, with roots and fallen branches, making it difficult to move quickly. The bear showed no signs of stopping, its deep growls filling the air as it charged forward. The rangers knew they had to think fast before the situation became worse. The group spotted a rocky incline ahead, leading toward a narrow ridge. Without hesitation, they climbed up, using every bit of strength to pull themselves higher. The steep rocks made it hard to gain footing, but they pushed forward, hoping the bear would not follow. As they reached the top, they turned back and saw the giant creature at the bottom, staring up at them. For a moment, everything was silent except for the wind moving through the trees. The bear did not retreat. Instead, it let out another deep growl and reared onto its hind legs, standing taller than ever. The rangers realized the danger was not over. The grizzly seemed frustrated, its powerful claws scratching the ground as it searched for a way up. Then, suddenly, it took a step back. The rangers held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Instead of climbing, the bear turned toward a different path, walking away from the rocky ridge. The group stayed still, watching as it disappeared into the thick trees. Only after a few long moments did they allow themselves to breathe again. The chase had ended, but the experience had left them shaken. The rangers carefully made their way down the other side of the ridge, staying close together in case the bear returned. Their bodies were exhausted, but they knew they had to keep moving until they reached a safer area. After what felt like hours, they finally arrived at a clearing where they could contact their team. They quickly sent a message about the encounter, warning others about the enormous bear and its aggressive behavior. News of the event spread quickly. Experts studied the massive paw prints and confirmed that this was the largest grizzly ever recorded in the region. Scientists believed the bear's aggression was linked to a lack of food, making it more territorial than usual. Wildlife officials took extra precautions, setting up warning signs and advising visitors to stay alert while exploring the park. The rangers knew they had witnessed something rare. They had encountered one of nature's most powerful creatures and survived to tell the story. Though they were unharmed, the memory of the chase would stay with them forever. The experience reminded them of the unpredictable side of the wild, where even the most experienced teams could face moments of danger. Over time, the grizzly continued to roam the national park's forests, a living emblem of the untamed wilderness. The rangers never forgot the day they encountered the largest bear ever recorded, a moment etched into their memories forever. In June 2023, Jasper J. Langston stood by the banks of the Kenai River in Alaska, his fishing rod steady in his hands. The sun shone brightly over the vast wilderness, casting golden light on the rushing water. Jay had spent most of his life fishing in these remote areas, where he found peace and adventure. At 54 years old, he was an experienced outdoorsman who knew the land well. He had grown up in Anchorage but had moved to a quieter town years ago to be closer to nature. Fishing was not just a hobby for him, but a way of life. On this particular day, Jay had already caught several fish. His cooler was nearly full, and he was about to pack up when he noticed movement among the trees. A large grizzly bear had emerged from the dense forest, its heavy steps silent against the soft earth. It was not unusual to see bears in this area, especially near the river where they searched for salmon. Jay had encountered bears before, always keeping a safe distance. However, this time, something made him hesitate. The bear moved closer to the water, sniffing the air. It was a massive creature, its fur thick and golden brown. Jay could tell it was searching for food. Wanting to avoid trouble but also curiosity, he grabbed a fish and reached into his bucket. With a quick motion, he tossed it toward the bear. The fish landed on the ground a short distance away. The bear stopped, looked at it, then slowly approached. After sniffing the fish, it grabbed it with its powerful jaws and swallowed it in one bite. Jay watched carefully. The bear seemed uninterested in him, focused only on the food. Encouraged by this, he threw another fish a little closer. The bear took the offering, still calm and quiet. Jay's heart raced with excitement. He had never been this close to a grizzly before. He had seen others feed animals, though he knew it was dangerous. But at this moment, it felt like an incredible experience. Jay grabbed another fish and tossed it closer, thinking he could get a better look. This time, the bear's reaction changed. It lifted its head sharply, its eyes locking onto Jay. The calmness was gone. Its ears flattened, and a low, rumbling growl echoed across the riverbank. Jay's breath caught in his throat. He realized his mistake. The bear no longer saw him as harmless. It saw him as a threat. Suddenly, the bear charged. Jay dropped his fishing rod and turned to run, his boots slipping on the uneven ground. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he sprinted toward the trees, but the bear was much faster. The heavy thuds of its paws grew louder behind him. Jay knew he had no chance of outrunning it. Before he could react, the bear was upon him. The grizzly struck him with a massive paw, knocking him to the ground. Its powerful jaws clamped down, and the attack turned fatal in moments. The quiet riverbank was now filled with chaos. The bear, its instincts fully awakened, did not hesitate. The struggle was brief. Soon the only sounds were the rushing water and the rustling leaves in the breeze. The massive animal stood over the unmoving body before slowly backing away. It sniffed the air, then turned toward the trees, disappearing into the thick forest as quickly as it had arrived. The wilderness returned to silence, leaving behind only the evidence of what had happened. Hours passed before anyone came across the scene. A group of hikers traveling along the river spotted an abandoned fishing rod and a tipped-over cooler. As they moved closer, they noticed something was wrong. The disturbed ground and the scattered belongings painted a clear picture. One of them quickly called for help. Authorities were alerted, and soon, a search team arrived at the site. Rescue workers carefully examined the area, confirming the worst. The grizzly's tracks led back into the forest, but the animal was nowhere to be seen. Experts studying the scene believed the bear had acted out of frustration rather than pure aggression. The sudden approach to food, followed by repeated interaction, confused the animal. In the wild, feeding large predators often creates dangerous situations, as it blurs the natural boundaries between humans and wildlife. News of the attack spread quickly. Local officials warned residents and visitors about the dangers of interacting with bears, no matter how calm they appeared. Park rangers placed new signs along riverbanks, reminding people never to feed wild animals. Experts spoke on television, explaining how such events could be prevented. Many in the fishing community were shaken by what had happened. Some who knew Jay personally mourned the loss of a man who had spent his life in nature. Biologists tracking bear activity in the area searched for the grizzly involved. They set up cameras and monitored their movements. However, no attempts were made to capture or harm the animal. It had reacted based on instinct, not aggression. Authorities stressed the importance of respecting wildlife from a distance. Jay's family held a small gathering near the river where he had spent so much of his life. They shared memories of his adventures, his love for the outdoors, and deep respect for the land. While his decision that day had led to tragedy, those who knew him remembered him for his life, rather than how it had ended. The attack remained a cautionary tale for those who explored the wild. Visitors to Alaska were reminded to keep their distance from bears, no matter how peaceful they seemed. The river, unchanged by the event, continued to flow as it always had. The beautiful and unforgiving wilderness remained a place of wonder and danger, where respect for nature was the only true protection. August 2024, David Walker embarked on a hiking trip across the rugged terrain of Kodiak Island, Alaska. The island, known for its dense forests and towering mountains, was home to one of the world's largest populations of Kodiak bears. David, a 29-year-old experienced hiker, had spent years exploring remote wilderness areas, pushing himself to new limits. He had always been drawn to the solitude of nature, finding peace in the quiet landscapes far from crowded cities. That morning the air was crisp, and the wind carried the scent of pine through the towering trees. David walked along a narrow dirt trail, following a route deep into the island's heart. His backpack had essential supplies, including food, water, and a satellite phone for emergencies. He had planned his journey carefully, knowing the risks of trekking through bear country. The trail was empty, and only the distant calls of birds broke the silence. As he moved forward, he remained cautious, scanning his surroundings for any sign of wildlife. Kodiak bears were known to roam the area, searching for food before the harsh winter arrived. Despite his awareness, David had yet to spot any movement among the trees. He continued at a steady pace, his boots crunching against the gravel. A sudden noise behind him made him stop. It was a low rustling, followed by the snap of a branch. His heart quickened as he turned around. At that moment, he saw a massive Kodiak bear emerging from the thick brush. Its brown fur was matted, and its powerful muscles rippled beneath its heavy frame. The bear stood motionless briefly before lowering its head and charging forward. David's instincts told him to run, but he knew it was too late. The bear reached him in seconds, knocking him off his feet. The impact sent him crashing onto the ground, his backpack pressing against his back. Before he could react, the bear's powerful jaws clamped onto his legs. A sharp pain shot through his body as the bear bit down, its teeth tearing into his flesh. Blood soaked through his pants, and he let out a muffled cry. The weight of the bear pinned him in place. The world around him blurred as his vision darkened with pain. The bear released its grip briefly, then bit down again, dragging him slightly along the dirt. The wounds on both of his legs deepened, and his body trembled from the shock. He knew he had to act fast if he wanted to survive. With his remaining strength, he reached for a rock nearby and threw it toward the bear's head. The bear hesitated, shifting its focus for a moment. Using the distraction, David pushed himself backward, inching away from the animal. He spotted a small clearing nearby and crawled toward it, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through his body. His only hope was to reach his satellite phone before it was too late. David's hands trembled as he reached for his satellite phone. His vision blurred, and every movement sent sharp pain through his legs. He pressed the emergency button, hoping for a signal in the remote wilderness. The bear's growl echoed behind him, but did not charge again. Instead, it stood still, watching him. Blood covered the ground, and its scent filled the air. The bear sniffed once before turning away and disappearing into the dense forest. Relief washed over him, but he knew he was not safe yet. The deep wounds in his legs made it impossible to stand. The bites had torn through his muscles, leaving him weak and unable to move quickly. His only hope was that his distress signal had been received. Lying on his back, he stared at the sky, struggling to stay conscious. The sun moved slowly and time felt stretched. The cold air stung his skin, and the sound of rustling leaves reminded him that danger was still near. Minutes passed, then hours. He fought against the dizziness creeping into his mind. His breathing became shallow, and his body felt heavier. A faint sound broke through the silence. The steady hum of helicopter blades grew louder. Hope returned as he realized that rescue was near. He forced himself to stay awake, knowing help was just above him. A team of rescuers descended from the helicopter, moving quickly toward him. They checked his injuries and wrapped bandages around his legs. The wounds continued to bleed, but the pressure helped slow it down. A stretcher was lowered, and they carefully lifted him onto it. The pain was overwhelming, but he remained still. The helicopter rose into the sky, carrying him away from the wilderness. The journey to the hospital felt long. The medics worked to keep him stable, monitoring his condition. The wind outside howled against the helicopter's frame, but everything remained focused and calm inside. When they finally landed, doctors and nurses rushed to take over. He was moved into the emergency room, where his wounds were cleaned and stitched. The painkillers numbed his senses, allowing him to rest for the first time since the attack. News of the incident spread quickly. Wildlife experts analyzed the attack, explaining that the bear had likely been startled. The encounter reminded people of the risks associated with exploring the wild, and people discussed the importance of safety measures and awareness in bear territory. David remained in the hospital for several weeks. His legs required surgery, and recovery was slow, but he was grateful to be alive. The scars on his body told the story of his survival. Despite the ordeal, he refused to let fear take away his love for nature. He knew the wilderness was unpredictable, but it was also where he felt most alive. His experience became a lesson for others, showing both the power of nature and the strength of those who faced it. It was early morning when the call came in. The gentle morning light barely pierced the thick mist that hung over the town of East Glacier, Montana. Fish and wildlife officers, Drew Adams and Sarah Pierce, had spent years responding to reports of bears straying too close to human settlements. Still, there was something unusual about this particular call. The witness claimed the grizzly was unlike any they had ever seen, so huge it loomed over the trees. Bears this large were rare, if not unheard of. Drew and Sarah knew they needed to investigate immediately. They drove toward the reported location, scanning the dense forest that closed in around them. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp pine needles, the morning chill seeping through a cracked window. Drew, a rugged man in his early 40s with years of experience tracking predators, kept his eyes locked on the trail ahead, his grip firm on the steering wheel. Beside him, Sarah, younger but just as capable, checked her rifle, her movements methodical. They had dealt with aggressive bears before, but nothing about the reports felt routine. When they reached the area, they stepped out cautiously, their boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. The forest was quiet, as if every living creature had chosen to stay hidden. Then, through the thinning mist, they saw it. An enormous shape hunched over a carcass, its massive shoulders rippling with raw power as it tore into the flesh of its kill. The grizzly was far larger than any bear they had ever seen. Its dark fur was streaked with blood. It dwarfed the fallen animal beneath it, its immense paws easily ripping through sinew and bone. Drew took charge of the situation. He motioned for Sarah to stay close, and their every movement was careful as they assessed the bear's behavior. It had claimed its kill, which made it dangerous. If it saw them as a threat to its meal, its response would be no hesitation. Sarah raised the rifle slightly, not yet aiming, just preparing in case the situation escalated. But before either could react further, the bear lifted its massive head. In an instant, the grizzly exploded forward, its enormous body covering the distance between them in seconds. Drew and Sarah couldn't move. Their shock was too strong, too real. The beast was upon them instantly, sending them sprawling onto the forest floor. Drew hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs, pain radiating through his ribs as he scrambled to get his bearings. Sarah was thrown in the opposite direction, her rifle slipping from her grasp as she skidded through the undergrowth, a sharp rock gashing her forearm. Before she could even push herself up, the grizzly was there. The weight of the beast was crushing. It pinned her down as one colossal paw swiped across her torso, claws tearing deep into her flesh. She tried to scream, but the pain swallowed the sound whole, her vision blurring from the shock. She fought desperately to push the bear off, but its strength was immeasurable. Drew, still gasping for air, forced himself onto his hands and knees, his mind a whirlwind of panic and survival instinct. He could see Sarah struggling beneath the monstrous bear. The animal's fangs were snapping dangerously close to her face. Adrenaline surged through him, pushing him forward. His hand grasped at the ground, fingers curling around a thick fallen branch slick with morning dew. With every ounce of strength he had left, he swung it, the wood cracking against the bear's side. The impact was enough to draw the beast's attention, though it did little to stop its rage. The grizzly turned, letting out a snarl reverberating through the air as it reared up, towering over Drew like an unstoppable force of nature. He shoved the branch forward, pressing it against the animal's chest in a desperate attempt to keep those lethal claws at bay. The bear swatted at it, snapping the wood as if it were nothing. Sarah forced herself to move despite the agony, her fingers searching through the leaves and dirt until they found the cold metal of her sidearm. Every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her, but she gritted her teeth, ignoring the searing wounds as she lifted the weapon with trembling hands. The bear's attention was still on Drew, its massive body lunging toward him, its weight crashing like an avalanche. Without hesitation, Sarah fired. The gunshot shattered the stillness of the forest. The bullet didn't kill the bear, but did something just as crucial. It startled it. The beast flinched, its enormous frame shuddering as the sound rang through the trees. For the first time, there was hesitation in its movements. It took a staggering step back, its breath heaving, muscles coiled, before it finally turned and retreated into the shadows of the woods. Drew collapsed onto his back, his entire body shaking, lungs fighting for breath. Sarah let the gun fall from her grip, her bloodied hand pressing against her torn side, the warmth of her own life leaking between her fingers. They had survived, but barely. Every inch of them ached, and every breath was a struggle, but they were alive. With their remaining strength, they dragged themselves toward the truck. The radio crackled as Drew reached for it with bloodied fingers, his voice hoarse, each word an effort. Help was coming, but the hours stretched endlessly before them, every second laced with agony, every movement a battle against pain. By the time the rescue team arrived, both officers were barely clinging to consciousness as they were lifted onto stretchers and rushed toward the nearest hospital. The monstrous bear still roamed the woods, its shadow a reminder of the brutal, merciless force of nature that lurked beyond civilization's fragile borders. Tom Haggerty had spent the last 20 years behind the wheel, hauling freight across the country, navigating endless highways and empty stretches of land where the only company was the hum of his engine and the occasional sign warning of wildlife crossings. At 53, he was well accustomed to the risks of his job: stiff joints, aching muscles, and the deep fatigue that never quite left, no matter how many hours of sleep he managed between deliveries. He was used to the solitude and the long hours. Whenever he was tired, he would rest on desolate highways before pushing forward again. But nothing had prepared him for what lurked in the darkness one autumn night. The highway was nearly empty as he eased his rig onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching against the loose stones before coming to a stop. The dashboard clock glowed in the dim cab, marking the late hour. He had been driving for nearly 10 hours straight, and exhaustion weighed heavily on him. He needed a break. With a tired groan, he pulled the parking brake, reached for the thermos in the cup holder, and took a final swig of cold coffee before shoving the door open and stepping into the crisp Montana air. The night was quiet, and the stillness made everything feel even more isolated and peaceful. The headlights illuminated the stretch of highway ahead, but beyond that, darkness reigned. Towering pines lined the roadside, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, its lonely call echoing through the emptiness. Tom felt a kinship with the lone animal. The man stretched his legs, rolled his stiff shoulders, and exhaled, grateful for a moment away from the driver's seat. An unfamiliar sound startled him. He turned his head, peering into the darkness, his eyes straining to adjust. At first, he saw nothing, just the endless black of the forest. But then a shape emerged, a hulking figure stepping from the tree line, its massive frame illuminated in the dim glow of his truck's running lights. It was a huge grizzly bear, way bigger than Tom had seen on TV. Its broad shoulders shifted with every step. It kept its head low, watching Tom with caution. The air turned electric with the sudden awareness that he was no longer alone, that something so powerful was watching him. And in that moment, the thin thread of safety he had always felt around his truck snapped. Tom wasn't even surprised when the bear charged. He spun toward the cab, his boots skidding against the loose gravel as he lunged for the door. His fingers grasped the handle, but as he pulled himself inside, the bear slammed into the door with staggering force, the impact so powerful that the metal bent with a deep groan. The door flung open and the bear's teeth sank into Tom's calf, dragging him out of the truck. The bear threw him to the ground as if Tom were nothing but a rag doll. His breath was ripped from his lungs as he hit the ground. By the time he realized what was happening, the bear's claws were already raking across his side, slicing through the thick fabric of his jacket, as though it were paper. A burning pain tore through his flesh, hot blood seeping into his shirt as he scrambled to roll away, his hands digging into the dirt in a desperate attempt to push himself up. But the bear wasn't done. A crushing force clamped onto his leg, the pressure so intense that he thought his bone would snap. The bear's jaws had locked around his calf again, its teeth sinking deep, and when it pulled, agony shot through him, a white-hot fire spreading through his limb as he was dragged backward. He kicked wildly, his boot slamming against the bear's snout, but the creature barely flinched, its grip relentless, its hunger overriding any sense of pain. He knew he had to fight. If he stopped, if he gave in to the searing pain, he wouldn't walk away from this. His hands fumbled in the dirt, searching for anything he could use, and his fingers closed around a loose chunk of gravel. With all his strength, he twisted his body and swung, smashing the rock into the bear's face, striking just above its eye. The impact wasn't enough to cause real damage, but it was enough to make the bear hesitate. Using that brief moment, Tom wrenched his leg free, pain screaming through his muscles as he scrambled backward, kicking against the ground, trying to put as much distance between himself and the beast as possible. Blood streamed down his leg, staining the dirt beneath him, his vision swimming from the sheer exhaustion of the struggle. But the bear wasn't retreating. It shook its head, growled, and lunged again. Then a deafening blast shattered the night. The truck's air horn blared, a long, piercing sound reverberating through the trees, cutting through the silence like a knife. The bear jerked its head up, its ears flattening against its skull, startled by the sudden noise. For the first time it stopped completely, its powerful muscles tensing as it reevaluated the threat. The horn blared again, the deep bellowing sound vibrating through the truck's metal, and something in the bear's primal instincts kicked in. It took a step back, then another, its massive body shifting as it turned toward the trees. Tom barely had time to process what was happening before the bear, with one final huff, disappeared back into the darkness, its heavy footfalls fading into the night. For a long moment, Tom didn't move. He lay there, chest heaving, pain radiating from every inch of his body, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality that he was still alive. His leg throbbed with every heartbeat, his ribs ached, and his hands shook violently as he pushed himself up onto his elbows. He had no idea why the horn went off, none at all. It was either pure dumb luck or a miracle. With every ounce of strength he had left, Tom dragged himself toward the open truck door, his bloodied hands gripping the seat as he hauled himself inside. His body screamed in protest as he collapsed against the worn leather. He slammed the door shut and engaged the locks, his entire body trembling as the weight of what had just happened came crashing down on him. An hour later, emergency responders found Tom slumped in his seat, pain radiating from his wounds, but his heart still beating. He had survived. He was taken to the nearest hospital, where news of the attack spread quickly. Naturally, Tom's encounter sparked debates over the safety of truck drivers who often found themselves alone in wildlife-heavy areas. There was a need for better safety measures, for bear-proof truck designs, for stricter rules about where long-haul drivers could stop for rest. But none of it erased the deep scars that now ran along Tom's side, his leg, his arms, a permanent reminder of the night he had come face to face with death on the side of a lonely highway. Deep in the wilderness of Alaska's interior, far beyond the reach of roads and human noise, Peter Griggs lived a life of solitude and survival dictated by the land. At 50 years old, he had spent decades as a trapper, his hands worn and weathered from skinning hides, setting traps and hauling furs through frozen forests. He knew the rhythms of the wild and the importance of respecting the predators that roamed these unforgiving lands. However, experience was not always enough to keep a man safe. Not when nature decided to remind him just how small and fragile he truly was. One evening, Peter returned to his cabin after checking the last of his trap lines, his sled loaded with pelts. He was tired and hungry. Snow clung to his heavy boots as he stomped through the doorway, kicking the door shut behind him, eager to put a warm meal in his stomach before the cold night settled in. His cabin was small but sturdy, a single-room structure with thick logs stacked against the biting wind. A cast-iron stove was in the corner, a cot against the far wall, and shelves lined with supplies. It was not the comfort Peter lived for, but function, survival, and the bare necessities that kept him alive in a land where a single mistake could mean death. He moved through his routine efficiently, hanging his rifle by the door, shrugging off his thick coat, and setting a pot of stew to simmer over the stove. The rich scent of cooked meat and spices filled the cabin, mingling with the fire's smoky warmth. For a brief moment he allowed himself the luxury of quiet satisfaction, of the simple pleasure of food after a long day. But outside, in the darkness beyond the flickering glow of his cabin, something had already caught the scent of his meal, something that did not care for man's rules. The first sign was the faint rustle outside, a sound too heavy to be a smaller animal. Then came the slow scraping noise against the wooden walls, a dragging movement, as if something was testing the structure, searching for a way inside. Peter's body tensed immediately, instincts kicking in, his mind sharpening with the recognition of a threat. He turned toward the window just in time to see the enormous head of a grizzly bear pushing through the frame, its powerful shoulders forcing the opening wider, splintering the wooden edges as it hauled its bulk inside. The moment he moved, the bear lunged. It happened fast, faster than any man could react, way before his body could register the sheer enormity of the danger before him. 1 second he was reaching for the rifle, and the next, the bear's massive paw swiped across the room, sending him crashing into the table and the impact rattling the cabin walls. Pain shot through his ribs as he hit the ground. The bear did not stop. It came at him with fury, its heavy body slamming against the furniture, its claws carving deep gouges into the wooden floor as it advanced. Peter scrambled backward, his boots slipping against the floorboards. His mind raced for a plan. Could he come up with anything that could give him a chance? His rifle was out of reach. He had a knife strapped to his belt, but against something this massive, this relentless, a blade was little more than a desperate man's last stand. The bear lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from Peter's face, its breath hot and rank with raw flesh and decay scent. He barely managed to twist away, the claws tearing into his shoulder. Blood ran warm down his arm, his fingers numb as he fumbled for the knife. His grip was weak, and the pain made it hard for him to see. Peter lashed out with little strength, the blade striking the bear's thick fur, cutting deep but not deep enough. The beast roared, a sound so raw it rattled his bones, and then it struck again, its massive paw crashing down and pinning the man to the floor. The weight of the creature crushed him, and his ribs bent under the pressure. This was it. This was the end. Darkness swam at the edges of Peter's vision, the pain dulling, fading, his limbs growing heavy as his strength drained away. The bear's snarling face loomed above him, and it was the last thing he saw before everything went black. When the hunter found him the next morning, the cabin was silent, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood, the floorboards slick with it. The door stood wide open, snow drifted inside, and the wind whistled through the broken window. Peter's body lay in the center of the room, torn and lifeless, his knife still clutched in his stiffening fingers. The bear was gone, vanished into the endless expanse of the wild. The local community of trappers and hunters spoke of Peter Griggs with the respect reserved for men who had lived and died by the rules of the wilderness. Men who knew that every day in bear country was a gamble, that no amount of experience, no years spent reading tracks and learning the habits of the creatures that roamed these lands, could ever guarantee survival. Sarah and Jake were no strangers to the wilds of British Columbia. As experienced park wardens, they had spent countless hours patrolling the dense forests, winding rivers, and challenging terrain that made up the heart of the park. Sarah, a seasoned warden in her early 30s, was sharp-eyed and methodical. She had grown up in the outdoors with an understanding of the land and its creatures that came from years of personal and professional experience. Jake, her partner, was in his mid-20s. He was eager but still learning the finer nuances of wildlife behavior. Still, Jake had a natural curiosity that often made him want to press further, even when caution dictated otherwise. On this particular day in March 2025, they had ventured into a remote section of the park near a riverbank, their boots sinking softly into the damp earth as they trudged through the dense underbrush. The early morning mist still clung to the trees, casting an eerie quiet across the land. They had been alerted to signs of disturbance, broken branches, trampled undergrowth, and deep gouges in the earth, all pointing to a possible bear in the area, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. They followed the trail carefully, the strange scent growing stronger. It was different from the damp foliage, an animal's scent, pungent and unmistakable. The tracks were abnormally large, and Jake couldn't help but feel a growing tension in his chest. He had seen a few black bears before, but this was something else. The prints were massive, the claws at the edges unmistakable. They belonged to a grizzly. Sarah's eyes scanned the ground. She turned toward Jake and told him the prints looked fresh. Jake nodded, his pace quickening as he felt a thrill of excitement. It wasn't every day you got to track a creature as magnificent as a grizzly. They rounded a bend in the trail, and there it was. The river stretched out before them, glittering in the weak morning light, and a massive grizzly bear stood by its edge, its thick coat rippling as it dug its claws into the muddy riverbank. It was feeding, snapping up something from the water with unnerving precision. The size of the bear was beyond anything they had seen before, its massive shoulders and thick neck giving it an almost terrifying presence. The sight sent a cold shiver down Sarah's spine, but there was no panic. This was what they were trained for, observing, maintaining distance. The bear seemed unaware of their presence, focused entirely on the fish it was pulling from the river. They crouched behind a nearby thicket, the air suddenly thick with the weight of silence. Every move they made seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves beneath their boots feeling as loud as a gunshot. Sarah's heart raced, but she maintained her composure, her fingers tightening around the camera she'd brought along, ever ready to capture a rare moment like this. For a few moments they simply watched in awe, both transfixed by the power and grace the bear exhibited as it fed. The enormous creature moved fluidly, as if it ruled the land and the river alike, its broad back hunched slightly as it reached down, its fur glistening in the soft morning light. There was something majestic about it, something that demanded respect. They were visitors here, just as vulnerable as any other creature in the park. Suddenly, without warning, the bear paused. Its head jerked up, ears twitching, and it froze, nostrils flaring as it caught a faint scent on the wind. The entire scene shifted. The bear's body stiffened. It was alert now. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her body tensing. They were too close, too visible, but the bear hadn't noticed them yet. Jake's hand shot up, signaling for them to stay still. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. They were too close. The bear was right there, and their only hope now was to remain unnoticed. But the bear's gaze snapped to them, its eyes locking with Sarah's across the distance. In that instant, Sarah's heart pounded against her chest. The bear's gaze was intense, filled with curiosity. There was no fear in its eyes, only a kind of calculation. The air was heavy with tension. Sarah's mind raced. She slowly raised the camera to her eye. Her fingers shook as she pressed the shutter, capturing the moment, freezing the beast in time. The sound of the camera's click was like a shot in the air. In an instant, the grizzly's massive body jerked into motion, its head swiveling quickly to assess the threat. For a moment, time seemed to freeze again, the bear's posture shifting from curiosity to something darker. Then it stood. The movement was so swift, so powerful that Sarah's breath caught. The bear was on its hind legs, towering over them like a living mountain, its bulk blocking out the sky. It was enormous, unimaginably large, its claws gleaming in the light as it loomed above the river. Sarah estimated the beast to weigh over 1,600 pounds. Her heart slammed in her chest, but before she could even react, the bear dropped back to all fours and bolted into the woods. The sheer power and speed of the bear's retreat left Sarah and Jake standing in stunned silence. It had gone, but the echo of its presence lingered in the air like a storm just passed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sarah lowered the camera, her breath ragged in her chest as she tried to steady herself. The adrenaline surged through her body, and she could feel the tremor of the encounter in every muscle, every nerve. They had come so close, too close. They waited a few more minutes just to be certain the bear was truly gone, before slowly standing and heading back to their patrol vehicle. The forest around them seemed quieter, more still, as if it had become aware of their intrusion. Later, the photos they took were analyzed by wildlife experts, who confirmed that the bear was one of the largest grizzlies ever recorded in the park. The size and sheer strength of it were reminders that nature was unpredictable, and that the balance between humans and wildlife was delicate and fragile. Sarah and Jake had seen the bear, experienced the raw power of the wild up close. The encounter stayed with them, haunting their dreams and reminding them of the fine line between admiration and survival. 27-year-old Luca had dreamed of exploring the wilderness of Wyoming for years. The chance to witness nature's raw beauty was all that had driven him to take a solo hike across the park's famous Lamar Valley. As a tourist from Italy, he was thrilled by the prospect of experiencing the American wilderness firsthand. With a backpack slung over his shoulder and his camera ready, Luca felt like an adventurer, ready to embrace whatever the trail had to offer. The morning sun filtered through the trees as he trekked along the path, a quiet hum of excitement running through his veins. Luca was no stranger to hiking, though this was his first time in a park so wild and vast. He had prepared, reading up on the terrain, the wildlife, and the risks of bear encounters, but in his mind those were dangers that happened to others, not to someone young and strong like him. He smiled to himself as he passed through the lush meadows of the valley. The trail twisted and turned along the riverbanks, and the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling convinced Luca he was safe. He had been hiking for several hours when he reached a narrow bend in the trail, where the underbrush thickened and the path grew quiet. The sudden shift in atmosphere made Luca pause. He couldn't pinpoint why, but something felt off. His instincts kicked in and he slowly began to retrace his steps. But before he could make any decisions, the rustling sounds in the bushes ahead became unmistakable. A shadow loomed just beyond the brush, and before Luca could react, the massive shape of a grizzly bear emerged, its shaggy coat glistening under the sunlight. The bear's eyes locked onto him, and Luca froze. The bear's ears flattened, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. What made the situation worse was the small group of cubs trailing behind her. The mother bear stood tall, her protective instincts taking over. Luca's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that he had walked right into their territory. The bear's stare never wavered, and Luca's breath caught in his throat as he instinctively took a step back. He knew better than to turn and run, but panic overtook him. He tried to back away slowly, but his legs didn't listen to him. He started sprinting, and then the bear lunged, covering the distance between them in a matter of seconds. Luca's heart nearly stopped as he stumbled backward. His feet caught in the uneven ground. The bear slammed into him with crushing force, sending him to the ground. The air was knocked from his lungs, and a sharp pain shot through his body as he crashed to the dirt. His hands instinctively went to protect his head, but the bear was focused on his exposed chest. Its claws raked across Luca's chest, the thick, razor-sharp talons digging deep into his skin. Luca screamed, the pain searing through him as the bear's weight pressed down on him. He tried to push it off, his arms trembling under the immense pressure, but the bear's grip tightened. His legs were pinned beneath the massive body, and with a terrifying roar, the bear swiped its claws across his thighs, leaving deep, gaping wounds. Blood poured from the gashes, and Luca gasped for air, each breath labored and ragged. But then, the sharp sound of shouting voices sliced through the air, and the bear's attention shifted. A group of hikers had seen the attack. They had heard his cries for help, and they weren't about to stand by and let the bear finish its mauling. Panic-stricken but determined, they made loud noises, banging sticks together and shouting as loudly as they could. The bear hesitated, its massive body tense, the growl in its throat rumbling as it scanned the area. For a split second, the bear seemed to pause, its focus shifting from Luca to the commotion behind it. Luca could feel its claws retracting slightly, its weight lessening as it considered retreating. The hikers pressed forward, yelling and making more noise, trying to scare the bear off. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the grizzly let out a low growl, its eyes flicking between Luca and the group before it turned and lumbered back toward the woods, taking its cubs with it. The hikers rushed to Luca's side. One of them immediately dialed for help while the others tried to keep him awake, their hands shaking as they applied pressure to his wounds. His vision was blurred and his body felt as though it were made of lead, but he was alive. Through the haze of pain, he could hear the distant sound of a helicopter approaching, the blades cutting through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Within minutes, the rangers arrived. They worked swiftly, assessing Luca's condition. His blood loss was already considerable. They carefully placed him on a stretcher and airlifted him to a nearby hospital, the chopper's whirling blades cutting through the cold mountain air. Luca's survival was nothing short of a miracle. However, the attack left him with permanent scars, both physical and emotional. His legs and chest were badly injured, and though he would eventually regain the use of his limbs, he would never forget the sheer terror of that moment. The park rangers had done everything they could, but it was the hiker's quick thinking that had saved his life. In the wake of the attack, the park launched a series of awareness campaigns aimed at international visitors, emphasizing the importance of bear safety and proper precautions when hiking in bear country. For Luca, the wilderness would forever be a place of awe and fear, and the scars he bore would always be a testament to the risks he had taken in the name of adventure. The air was crisp and clean as the blue sky stretched across Kodiak Island, Alaska. Ryan, an adventurous 8-year-old, was excited for the family camping trip that had brought them to the wilds of this remote part of the world. It was an opportunity for his parents, Laura and Mark, to escape the stress of their busy lives, and for Ryan to explore the beauty of nature. They set up their camp near the edge of a secluded forest, with tall, thick trees forming a natural barrier around their site. The sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves filled the air as they enjoyed their afternoon. The day had been perfect. They had spent hours hiking along the nearby trails, with Ryan running ahead, his energy boundless as he tried to keep up with the laughter of his parents. They explored the edges of the creek, skipping rocks and feeling the cool water on their skin. After a while, tired from the long walk, Ryan's parents settled near their campfire, enjoying the warmth while Ryan found new places to explore on his own. It was the perfect family trip, until it wasn't. While his parents relaxed by the campfire, Ryan, ever curious and eager to explore, wandered off toward the creek not far from their campsite. The water flowed gently, babbling over rocks and pebbles. Ryan knelt beside the creek, watching as fish darted in the shallows, his small fingers dipping into the cool water. He was lost in the beauty of his surroundings, unaware of the dangers that lurked in the woods beyond. What Ryan didn't know was that just beyond the trees, a Kodiak bear had been foraging through the forest. The powerful scent of the campfire, mixed with the smell of food from their cooking area, had caught the bear's attention. Bears on Kodiak Island were known for their massive size and ferocity, and they were particularly drawn to human settlements during the warmer months when food was more abundant. This particular bear, a mature male, was prowling through the forest, searching for an easy meal. The scent of food, combined with the presence of the curious child, led it closer to the creek, its nose twitching as it picked up the smell. Ryan, unaware of the bear's presence, continued to play at the water's edge. The bear, its massive body hidden in the shadows of the trees, had spotted the child. It watched him for a few moments until it could no longer resist. The bear moved silently through the trees, its large paws pressing into the earth without making a sound. The first warning came in the form of a low growl, barely audible over the rushing water of the creek. Ryan's head snapped up, his heart racing as the ground seemed to tremble. His instincts screamed at him to run, but before he could even turn, the bear charged with terrifying speed, crashing through the underbrush with a strength that shook the very trees. The ground beneath Ryan's feet shook as the bear closed the distance. Ryan screamed as the bear collided with him, knocking him to the ground. The impact was brutal. The massive creature's claws raked across his back, sending a shock of pain through his small body. The scream that escaped his throat was high-pitched and desperate, a cry for help that echoed through the woods. His frail body crumpled under the weight of the bear, unable to escape the terror of its attack. The bear began to swipe at Ryan, its claws slicing through the boy's clothes and skin. Ryan's screams enraged the bear as it continued its vicious assault. Blood stained the ground, and the boy's small body was tossed about like a rag doll under the immense strength of the bear. The creature's jaws snapped dangerously close to Ryan, narrowly missing his face as it clawed at him with unrelenting fury. His small frame was no match for the raw power of the bear. Back at the campsite, Mark and Laura, exhausted from the day's activities, were just beginning to settle into the quiet of the evening when they heard the first scream. The sound was unlike any they had ever heard, wild, terrified, and filled with pain. Without thinking, they both sprang to their feet, their hearts pounding as they realized the source of the scream. Their son. They raced toward the sound, panic rising in their chests. Mark's legs moved faster, but nothing seemed quick enough as they broke through the trees, their eyes frantically scanning the area. When they reached the creek, the sight that greeted them was beyond anything they could have prepared for. Ryan was on the ground, barely conscious, blood soaking into the dirt. The bear, having finished its attack, was retreating back into the trees, but it was too late. Ryan's body, limp and broken, lay where the bear had left him, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Mark dropped to his knees beside his son, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the damage. Laura, horrified and crying, pulled out her phone, frantically dialing for help. The world seemed to slow around them as they waited for emergency services to arrive, their hearts breaking with each passing second. They administered what first aid they could, applying pressure to the wounds, but the damage was severe. Ryan's small body was covered in deep lacerations, and the blood loss was immense. His breathing was labored and his eyes flickered weakly as he fought to hold on. Mark and Laura both tried to comfort him, but there was no denying what they both knew. Rescue teams arrived within 20 minutes, airlifting Ryan to the nearest medical facility. But by the time he reached the hospital, he had succumbed to his injuries. The damage inflicted by the bear had been too much for his young body to withstand. The devastating attack shook the community and ignited a wave of outrage and grief. Ryan's parents, though heartbroken, became advocates for increased safety measures in bear-populated areas, hoping to prevent future tragedies. In the wake of Ryan's death, park authorities rolled out new protocols, urging visitors to secure their food in bear-safe containers, stay vigilant at all times, and educate children on the dangers of approaching wildlife. The memory of Ryan's innocent adventure, a simple moment of joy in the wilderness, was forever tainted by the brutal attack. His family, forever changed by the events of that fateful day, became a symbol of the need for greater awareness and respect for the animals that shared the wild with. Deep within the rugged wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, a region renowned for hosting the largest brown bears in the world, an extraordinary encounter occurred in the summer of 2018 that would challenge even the most experienced wildlife experts' understanding of these magnificent creatures. With its lush forests, salmon-filled streams, and relative isolation from mainland Alaska, Kodiak Island had long served as a sanctuary for a thriving population of Kodiak bears, a subspecies of brown bear known for their impressive size. During what had begun as a routine wildlife survey in the island's northeastern sector, a team of 4 forest rangers led by Senior Ranger Tobias McAllister ventured into a remote valley seldom visited by humans. The area had been flagged for assessment due to unusual wildlife movement patterns detected by satellite tracking. The team, consisting of McAllister, Junior Rangers Priya Sharma and Esteban Rodriguez, and wildlife photographer Annika Johansson, had expected to document typical bear activity and perhaps spot a few specimens at a distance. What they encountered, however, defied all expectations. As the team navigated through a dense thicket of alders near a small tributary creek, they suddenly froze at the sound of heavy movement ahead. Emerging from the foliage was a Kodiak bear of unprecedented proportions. Standing nearly 12 feet tall on its hind legs and estimated to weigh approximately 1,800 pounds, the bear dwarfed any specimen previously documented in the region. The rangers reported that their initial reaction was complete disbelief. Sharma later noted that the bear's head appeared to be the size of a standard office desk, with paws that could easily crush a human skull with minimal effort. The team's extensive training momentarily abandoned them as they stood paralyzed by fear and awe. The situation escalated when the massive bear, seemingly startled by the human intrusion, charged toward the group. McAllister, with 15 years of wilderness experience, instructed the team to stand perfectly still rather than flee, knowing that running would likely trigger the bear's predatory instincts. Their heart rates spiked dangerously as the enormous creature closed the distance between them in mere seconds, its thunderous footfalls shaking the ground beneath them. Remarkably, the bear halted its charge just 10 feet from the group. Rising to its full height, it towered over them, its breath visible in the cool Alaskan air. For what the rangers described as the longest 45 seconds of their lives, the bear held its imposing stance, appearing to study the humans with unmistakable intelligence. Rodriguez would later remark that he had never felt so completely insignificant in his entire career, likening the experience to standing before a living mountain. Just as mysteriously as it had appeared, the bear slowly lowered itself to all fours and retreated backward into the forest, maintaining eye contact with the rangers until it disappeared into the undergrowth. The team stood motionless for several minutes afterward, processing what had just occurred. Upon returning to base camp, the rangers immediately reported their encounter. Within 48 hours, a specialized team of wildlife biologists led by Dr. Helena Volkova from an Alaska university arrived to investigate. Using the photographic evidence captured by Johansson during the encounter, initial analysis suggested that this particular bear might represent an anomaly in the species' development. Dr. Volkova's team set up observation stations and specialized tracking equipment throughout the area, hoping to gather more data on the exceptional specimen. Preliminary theories suggested several possible explanations for the bear's extraordinary size: uniquely favorable genetics, an unusual abundance of food resources in its territory, or potentially advanced age combined with a lifetime free from significant injuries or competition. The discovery prompted a reconsideration of the upper size limits previously established for Kodiak bears. Most adult males typically weighed between 800 and 1,500 pounds, making this individual a significant outlier. The team collected hair samples from trees where the bear had rubbed, hoping to extract DNA for further study. For McAllister and his team, the encounter fundamentally altered their approach to wildlife management in the region. Additional safety protocols were implemented for rangers operating in the area, and civilian hiking permits were temporarily restricted in the northeastern sector of the island. The incident also sparked renewed interest in bear conservation efforts. As Rodriguez observed in his field report, the existence of such a magnificent creature emphasized the importance of preserving these wilderness areas from encroaching development and climate-related threats. 1 year after the encounter, limited evidence suggested that the bear continued to thrive in its territory. Multiple motion-activated cameras occasionally captured images of the massive bear, though always at a distance. The research team noted that it appeared to maintain a larger-than-typical territory and demonstrated unusual intelligence in avoiding human contact. The giant Kodiak bear of 2018 remained a powerful reminder of nature's capacity to inspire fear and reverence, a living testament to the wild grandeur still in Alaska's remote wilderness. The remote southeastern region of Russia's Amur Oblast, where dense taiga forests meet the rugged foothills of the Bureya Mountains, a sporting event turned into a horror scene during the summer of 2009. The area, known for its breathtaking natural beauty and abundant wildlife, had been selected for the inaugural Kingan Mountain Marathon. It was designed to showcase the wilderness and attract international tourism to this sparsely populated territory. The Amur Oblast, sharing a border with China and home to endangered Siberian tigers and Himalayan bears, had experienced growing economic interest as Russian officials sought to develop its ecotourism potential. The marathon route had been carefully planned to wind through some of the region's most scenic areas while remaining within zones considered safe for human activities, avoiding known wildlife corridors and denning sites. On July 12, 2009, approximately 84 participants from 12 countries gathered at the starting line near the small town of Arcara. The weather conditions were ideal. Clear skies with temperatures around 21 degrees Celsius. Race officials stationed supply points every 5 kilometers along the 42-kilometer route, and safety personnel monitored the course. Irina Morozova, a 38-year-old financial analyst from Moscow with considerable experience in wilderness marathons, had positioned herself in the middle of the pack. Having completed similar events in Siberia and the Ural Mountains, Morozova had developed a reputation among fellow runners as a knowledgeable outdoors woman. Nearby ran Dmitry Kuznetsov, a 45-year-old physician from St. Petersburg participating in his first wilderness marathon. The initial stages of the race proceeded without incident. The lead runners had already passed the halfway point when the situation turned catastrophic. At approximately 11:37 a.m., as Morozova and Kuznetsov were navigating a section of the course that passed through a particularly dense stretch of forest, a large brown bear, later identified as a Ussuri brown bear, a subspecies of the grizzly, emerged suddenly from the underbrush. According to subsequent accounts from survivors, the bear appeared agitated and disoriented. Wildlife experts would later theorize that the unusual concentration of human activity and noise had likely disturbed the bear from its daytime resting place, triggering a defensive response. The animal, estimated to weigh approximately 350 kilograms, 770 pounds, charged directly toward the runners. The group immediately scattered in panic. Most participants veered off the trail into the forest or sprinted ahead to safety. Morozova stumbled on an exposed tree root while attempting to flee. The bear reached her within seconds, knocking her violently to the ground with a powerful swipe of its foreleg. Kuznetsov, displaying remarkable courage, attempted to distract the animal by shouting and waving his arms. This intervention proved tragically ineffective. The bear briefly turned its attention toward Kuznetsov, allowing Morozova to attempt crawling away. However, the bear quickly returned to Morozova, inflicting catastrophic injuries before Kuznetsov again tried to intervene. The bear then attacked Kuznetsov, causing severe lacerations to his torso and limbs before suddenly breaking off the attack and retreating into the forest. Other runners, hearing the commotion, cautiously returned to the scene. Pyotr Orlovsky, a military veteran with medical training, attempted emergency first aid while others used satellite phones to contact race officials. Despite these efforts, Morozova's injuries proved too severe. She succumbed before the medical helicopter arrived, approximately 40 minutes later. Kuznetsov, though critically injured with deep lacerations across his chest and a partially crushed shoulder, survived the initial attack. The Russian authorities' response was swift. The race was immediately canceled, and all participants were evacuated from the course. Regional wildlife officials, supported by local hunters familiar with the terrain, organized a tracking team to locate the bear, concerned that it might pose an ongoing threat to humans in the area. After a 30-hour search, they located and euthanized the animal approximately 12 kilometers from the attack site. Forensic examination of the bear revealed several interesting findings. The male bear was approximately 12 years old, relatively elderly for the species, and showed signs of dental disease and malnourishment. These factors potentially contributed to its unusual aggression, as the animal may have been experiencing pain and hunger, making it less tolerant of disturbances. The incident prompted an immediate review of safety protocols for sporting events in wilderness areas throughout Russia. The Amur regional government implemented new requirements mandating armed rangers at all such events, comprehensive wildlife surveys before course approval, and bear deterrent spray carried by all participants. Kuznetsov spent 11 weeks recovering in hospitals, first in Blagoveshchensk and later in St. Petersburg. Despite undergoing multiple surgeries, he retained permanent disabilities, including limited mobility in his right arm. He later advocated for wildlife conservation and wilderness safety education in a remarkable demonstration of resilience. For the family of Irina Morozova, the tragedy brought unimaginable grief and eventually led to legal action against the event organizers for allegedly insufficient safety measures. The lawsuit resulted in improved regulations for wilderness sporting events throughout Russia. The Khingan Mountain Marathon was permanently canceled, though a memorial race on a modified urban course was established in Blagoveshchensk to honor Morozova's memory. A small monument marking the site of the attack now serves as a somber reminder of the incident, bearing an inscription in both Russian and English that reads, "Nature's power demands our respect and caution."